morning, and welcome to part 2 of our 3-part virtual series, What EPA Brownfields Grantees Should Know, hosted by NJIT Technical Assistance to Brownfield Communities. Today's webinar will focus on the topic of Davis-Bacon Act and Build America, Buy America. We're excited to have you all here, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to spend it with us. Whether you're a new grantee or just need a refresher on requirements, all are welcome. I also see that we have some returning attendees from our first part, all about procurement. Welcome back! For those I haven't met yet, my name is Fadma Matos, and I am the events coordinator here at NJIT's Center for Community Systems. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Alicia Flammia. Ms. Flammia is a BRS Senior Environmental Scientist with over 21 years of experience implementing and managing assessment and remediation projects throughout the Northeast. Alicia has acquired extensive knowledge of environmental regulatory requirements and cleanup strategies in her work as a technical lead for scores of EPA Brownfield assessment and cleanup grant projects. She holds a Master's of Science from Antioch University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Culture, Ecology, and Sustainable Community from New College of California. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Fatima. Good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar on the Davis-Bacon Act and the Build America, Buy America provisions. Next slide. Today, we'll be covering the Davis-Bacon Act and the Build America, Buy America Act and how these are applied to the EPA Brownfield projects. We will discuss the responsibilities of the Brownfield grantees and their contractors to maintain compliance with these requirements. Next slide. We'll start out with the Davis-Bacon Act. Enacted in 1931, the Act established the requirement to pay local prevailing wages for laborers and mechanics on public works jobs. The prevailing wage provisions apply when federal agencies assist construction projects through grants, loans, loan guarantees, and insurance. The Act applies to contractors and subcontractors performing on federally funded or federally assisted contracts valued at over $2,000 for the construction, alteration, or repair of public buildings or public works. Next slide. Cleanup activities typically include construction contracts, while assessment activities are generally considered professional services and are usually exempt from the Davis-Bacon Act. The Davis-Bacon Act is applicable to recipients of EPA subawards, including loans and subcontractors. Next slide. However, if any portion of the contract triggers the Davis-Bacon Act, then the entire contract must comply. So as you set up procurement for brownfield cleanup activities, it can be helpful to have a separate contract with any environmental consultant or other professional services contract, and a separate contract for the construction portion of the cleanup activity in order to limit the Davis-Bacon Act applicability. Next slide. Some cleanup activities at sites contaminated by petroleum are not subject to the Davis-Bacon Act requirements. Some of these activities may include remedial technologies, such as installation of large recovery wells, using soil vapor or groundwater extraction techniques, and backfilling of tank graves with clean fill material. And throughout this presentation, I would say that if there are any questions about whether or not your activity falls under Davis-Bacon Act or the Build America, Buy America Act, then you should discuss that situation with your EPA project officer before authorizing any work at the site. Next slide. So there are responsibilities of the grantee during several stages of the brownfield cleanup projects. The first is procurement. And the first responsibility is you must include wage rates and the requirements of those wage rates in your bid package. And you have to update wage determinations if the contract award is more than 90 days after the bid opening. Some important notes are that wage rates are adjusted periodically, so you want to check to see when those dates are valid. And if changes to wage rates published less than 10 days before bid opening can be disregarded if there is insufficient time to notify bidders and a report documenting this is made to the contract file. And once a Davis-Bacon wage rate has been locked into a contract, it stays in effect for the duration of that contract. Next slide. So what is a wage rate and where do you get it? Well, the bid package must contain both Davis-Bacon Act and state prevailing wage rates, and we will go over where to find those in the following slides. If your state does not have online wage rates posted, the grantee must request those rates from your state Department of Labor. And Davis-Bacon wage determinations can be obtained from sam.gov. We'll go over that. Next slide. So this slide shows how to obtain the Davis-Bacon Act wages online at sam.gov. In most cases, you will select the option of public buildings or works. And from there will be drop-down menus, and you will populate the state you're in and the county and the construction type. Now, most brownfield projects will be classified as heavy in terms of the labor category, unless you're working on an asbestos or lead paint removal job, which would most likely be classified as building. So you'll work through the sam.gov page using those drop-down menus. Next slide. And from there, you will select the active rate status and then download that wage determination document, which will be included in the bid package. This can be a very large piece of your bid package, could be 70 to 100 pages, depending on where your project is taking place. But you'll want to include the entire wage package. Next slide. There are other responsibilities for the grantee in the construction management phase and the contract administration phase of the brownfield cleanup. During construction management, which includes oversight in the field and interviews with trades and personnel, you'll be doing the interviews on site. And then during contract administration, you will be required to keep documentation about compliance with the Davis-Bacon Act, and you'll be doing some invoicing review and approval, making sure that the wage rates are in compliance with the wage package that was included in the bid. Next slide. So under construction management, we have interviews of the laborers on the job site, and you do that using a form that will show in the next slide. You want to verify that the job site postings are there. Those are posters that are required to be on site. And you want to verify that the wage rates or the project wage sheet are also acceptable on site to the laborers. Next slide. So here's that form. It's called Standard Form 1445. And what we do during the interviews is generally you are filling out the top portion of the form, so not the bottom. And you want to do these interviews usually within 2 weeks of the startup of construction on your site, and then another time within 2 weeks of the final certified payroll coming in for payment on the project. And the interviews should be done for both your prime contractors and your subcontractors. And you can request exceptions to the frequency of payroll spot checks in interviews. Next slide. So the job site posters look like what is shown on this slide here. And if the job is a short-term, fast turnaround time job, these posters are sometimes displayed on the back of a construction vehicle, or if it's a larger job, there's usually a job site trailer, and these are posted inside, out of the weather, and they must be accessible to the laborers on site. And also, you should include multiple languages if that's something that your laborers will be looking for as well. Next slide. So a project wage sheet can be kept on site instead of the entire wage package. Remember, I said that sometimes those wage packages are 70 to 100 pages, and you're looking for one page out of that package. So the wage sheet is a smaller, condensed list for laborer or operator. And having the project wage sheet on site also makes it easier for the person conducting the interview to verify that the worker wage rates are in compliance with the wage rate determination. Next slide. So sometimes the standard contract language that is used by a grantee does not always include the applicable language for the Davis-Bacon Act. So you will need to discuss those requirements with your contracting department in advance to avoid delays in procurement. And you should identify the person that is responsible for reviewing the certified payroll and maintaining records of the project once you get to invoice approval. Next slide. So once it comes time to review the certified payroll, the contractor will need to submit that certified payroll with each request for payment. And this is true for both the prime and the subcontractor job. The certified payroll must include a compliance statement, and it needs to be signed. And grantees can stipulate in the bid documents what type of form is to be used for certified payroll. We generally have this form that is shown here, Form WH347. But I think it is another format that can be used as well. Next slide. So once you've received that certified payroll, you're going to go back to that interview form that was filled out on site during the course of construction. And you're going to fill out that bottom portion, which is to be done by the payroll checker. And you want to confirm that the information provided by the laborers regarding their wages is the same information that's provided on the certified payroll. Next slide. So the contractor also has responsibilities under the Davis-Bacon Act. They need to request additional wage classification if there are issues with wage rates included in the bid. They must maintain those job site posters that we saw on the previous slide. They need to provide access for on-site interviews of their employees, and they need to include complete payment requests, including that certified payroll for both the prime and the subcontractors. Next slide. That was the quick and dirty on the Davis-Bacon Act. So now we're going to move into the Build America, Buy America provisions. Next slide. So BABA, as it is affectionately called, was enacted in 2021 and applies to federal cooperative agreements made after May 14th, 2022. Waivers are available from BABA for all Pacific Island territories and any cooperative agreements that were awarded between May 14th, 2022 and February 28th, 2023. There's more slides on waivers to come. But BABA applies to activities related to the construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of projects that are publicly owned or serve a public function. So BABA is not applicable to private projects. And note that these provisions are not applicable to any revolving loan fund loans made to private entities. Next slide. So what is BABA? BABA applies to all iron and steel manufactured products and construction materials that are used in the project, and they must be produced in the United States. And the applicable materials under BABA include any permanent features of the infrastructure project. So you can see under the not applicable side of this slide that tools and equipment that you might need as temporary on-site during the project are not applicable, as are equipment and furnishings such as chairs or desks that might also be used in the finished project. Next slide. So BABA applies to the entire infrastructure project in cases where multiple funding sources are used to complete the project. And again, assessment activities typically involve temporary items and usually will not be subject to the BABA provisions. For both the Davis-Bacon Act and the Build America, Buy America provisions, we're really talking about cleanup activities because that's where construction comes in. Going back to that statement, for both of these provisions that relate to the construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of projects that are publicly owned or serve a public function. Next slide. So let's walk through this together. Does your project involve construction, alteration, and or repair of a building? If no, then BABA is not applicable. But if it's yes, then we need to ask the next question. Does the project involve leaving any iron, steel, manufactured goods, or construction materials permanently at the property? Again, if no, then BABA is not applicable. But if you will be leaving these items permanently, then the next question we must ask is the project publicly owned or will it serve a public function? Again, no, then BABA is not applicable. But if yes, then BABA applies. So I have two examples. The first example is a revolving loan fund project that includes the remediation of a private property and the installation of a chain link fence and gate to prevent future dumping. In that scenario, BABA is not applicable because the funding is going to a private property, so it does not serve that public function. The next example is a cleanup project done on publicly owned property, including the removal of impacted soil, placement of clean fill as a cap, and the placement of geotextile delineation fabric. In this example, BABA does apply because it's public property and you will be leaving that geotextile delineation fabric in place permanently. Next slide. So we have some slides on waivers here. These are really something that you would want to talk with your EPA project officer about further. But they're good to know about because not all materials are made in the United States. So this might apply depending on the type of project you're working on. Generally speaking, waivers fall into two categories: general applicability waivers or the project or product specific waiver. So the product specific waiver is related to that product where it might not be made in America. And the general applicability waiver is more on a program-wide type of waiver. Next slide. One thing to note about waivers before I jump into these three different types is that timeline for waivers from initial submission to the Office of Management and Budget to the final waiver signature is 3 to 5 months on average. So this can really impact your project schedule, and it's something you would want to work out at the early stages of your project. So these are the types of waivers that fall into the categories, either general applicability or product-specific categories. Public interest waiver is when the procurement would be inconsistent with the public interest. Non-availability waiver is a waiver for those products that might not be produced in the U.S. or not produced in a sufficient available quantity. And then the unreasonable cost waiver is what it sounds like, where using that product produced in the U.S. will increase the project cost by more than 25%. Next slide, please. So manufacturers should note the use of minor components in their certification letters to document their product's compliance with BABA. And for all of these waivers, you will want documentation for the project file to certify compliance with BABA provisions. And before I get out of waivers, I also want to say that for anything that you need on your project to leave permanently at the site, you will need proper documentation from the manufacturer of that product. Next slide, please. So the responsibilities of the grantee under BABA include the bid documentation. So again, standard contract language used by you, the grantee, may not include applicable language for BABA. So you'll want to discuss this with your contracting department in order to avoid those delays. You need to be aware of the materials required for the project, and again, request those waivers in advance. And an important note is that EPA will not work with consultants, suppliers, or subrecipients on these waivers. So you, the grantee, must request that waiver from EPA. Next slide. So under construction management, you will need to review the material documentation and the certifications provided by the contractor. And I believe I have a slide of what that includes. Yep, I do. You'll also need to verify that the materials delivered to your site match the documentation that you got up front from the supplier. And for Davis-Bacon and for BABA, you need to retain this documentation because there may be potential future audits of these projects by the Department of Labor or some other entity. And having all of this documentation in your project folder will save you from headaches later. Next slide. So during contract administration, you need to verify that the material documentation matches the invoices for products delivered to the site. You want to verify the manufacturer certifications or waivers are on file prior to paying your vendors for these products. And again, you need to maintain that documentation. And grantees are responsible for ensuring that any subgrants or loan recipients comply with BABA. Next slide, please. So this slide shows exactly what you need on the documentation and certification from those manufacturers in order to comply with BABA. So you will need the project name, the list of the products that are being provided, where that manufacturing has taken place within the United States. It will need to be signed by a representative of the manufacturer, and it needs to reference the Build America, Buy America compliance statement. And this documentation will be saved to the project folder forever. And this is the page you will come back to and check during payroll compliance. Next slide. So that's all the technical details that we wanted to provide in this training. What we've got up here on this slide is the source documentation where you can find all the ins and outs on Davis-Bacon Act, and on Build America, Buy America. And you can look to those links for details that may not have been provided today. And you can also use these while you're having your conversation with your EPA project officer about whether or not these acts apply to your project. Thank you. So like that.
Thank you, Alicia. We've gone ahead and shared those resource links in the chat. If anyone's interested in reading further, throughout the presentation, we also linked those websites as well that Alicia referenced. We'll also be sharing those after the webinar for our registrants today. That'll be in a handy document, as well as the PowerPoint presentation, if you'd like for further reading. All right. Thank you so much, Alicia, for presenting today. And I hope everyone learned a little bit more about Davis-Bacon and Build America, Buy America. Now, let's get into some questions. I'm going to give folks a few moments to type in their questions in the Q&A window before we begin. Should anyone present today have any additional questions or comments after this webinar ends, feel free to utilize our post-webinar survey or connect with us on the NJIT TAB LinkedIn page. You may also visit our website at www.njit.edu/tab or other social media platforms to access more information, resources, and news. We would love to connect with you after today to see how we could assist you in your EPA Brownfield grantee journey. In fact, NJIT TAB can provide a multitude of services for communities in EPA regions 2 and 4. We serve as a free, independent resource to state, territory, regional, county, tribal, and local government entities and nonprofits attempting to learn about, identify, assess, clean up, and redevelop brownfields. At NJIT TAB, we help through our Brownfields Academy, Brownfield Community Engagement and Educational Forums, and one-on-one technical assistance. Along with virtual webinars such as today, NJIT TAB can assist you with other virtual or in-person Brownfield community engagement and educational forums, from beginner-friendly Brownfield basics to more hands-on technical events such as, but not limited to, panel sessions, community workshops, and Breaking Brownfields, where we invite private sector representatives and experts to answer your project-specific questions. NJIT TAB can meet you wherever you are in the Brownfields process. We also provide one-on-one technical assistance where we offer tailored guidance for many Brownfield-related tasks and can answer any questions that you may have about your Brownfield project. If you'd like more information, we also host our Brownfields Academy on our website at www.njit.edu/tab. Here you can find a wealth of information such as how-to videos, infographics, success stories, previously recorded webinars, news, upcoming events, and more. Speaking of upcoming events, first, I'd like to highlight our next virtual event. On September 5th, join us for the final part of our 3-part virtual series, What EPA Brownfield Grantees Should Know. Join us and our expert, Laura Burnham, as she guides attendees through grant management. New to the world of EPA Brownfield grants? Or maybe you just need a refresher. The Grant Management webinar is designed to assist EPA Brownfield grantees successfully manage their grant from the time of award through grant closeout. It will cover EPA grant regulations for maintaining a grant file and reporting to the EPA. The webinar will also provide guidance on requesting payments from EPA and how to request changes after award. If meeting face-to-face is more of your jam, we also have some in-person events coming up. On September 3rd through the 6th, NJIT TAB's Environmental Sustainability Planner, Carrie Martin, will be at this year's Florida Planning Conference to continue the conversation on climate resiliency and brownfield redevelopment for the session, Resilient Reuse, Green Infrastructure, and Brownfields. This panel session will include an introduction to brownfields, an overview of the negative public health impacts of brownfields, and how extreme events like flooding and extreme heat exacerbate the negative health impacts of brownfields, especially in low-income and communities of color. Attendees will hear how green infrastructure can improve air quality, water quality, and reduce flood and extreme heat impacts. They will also learn what to consider when implementing green infrastructure on brownfield sites. While in Florida, Carrie will also be presenting a workshop on grant strategies for abandoned or underused contaminated properties. Join her September 5th to learn more about brownfields and how to develop competitive EPA Brownfield Program grant applications. I know we have a few who are grant hopefuls, so I'm hoping you could join us. But also, as I mentioned in our last webinar, and I'll reiterate it today, I know some of our audience here today is made up of grant awardees. When it comes to brownfields, no one grant could do it all. The most successful projects take advantage of a multitude of funding sources to create a funding stack for their project. Perhaps you'll pick up some tips and tricks for your next grant writing endeavor. On September 18th, NJIT TAB's Director of Environmental Services, Kaylin Bruno, will be in Quincy, Florida for Brownfields, from vacant to vibrant. This interactive session will explore the opportunities that properties referred to as brownfields contribute to economic development in Gadsden County. Attendees will learn the basics of identifying and cleaning up these sites, how to access resources, perspectives on environmental justice, and planning for a resilient future. On September 19th, Kaylin will also be at this year's Alabama Brownfields Conference. Here she'll speak about the narrative sides of grant writing during her panel, Write Your Story, Crafting Your EPA Brownfield Grant Narrative. In addition, NJIT TAB will be hosting one of its dynamic sessions, Breaking Brownfields. In this interactive forum, a government entity or nonprofit presents their specific brownfields redevelopment challenge to a panel of private sector experts, who then provide actionable feedback on overcoming those obstacles. If you're interested in presenting your own brownfield-related challenges or lending your expertise to the panel, don't hesitate to reach out to NJIT TAB. Finally, on September 24th through the 25th, NJIT TAB will be presenting 2 sessions at Brownfield Coalition of the Northeast Sustainable Communities Workshop. The first session, Tips and Strategies for EPA Grant Writing, Setting You Up for Success, will teach attendees the grant writing process and will provide practical tools and knowledge to set you up for success in securing EPA Brownfields fundings. Remember what I said about that funding stack? The second session, Mining Community Assets for Funding Success, Telling Your Data Story for Grant Writing, will teach attendees how to gather existing data on your community's demographics, health, welfare, and geography to put your brownfield challenges in context. Discover how to transform these statistics and attributes into an impactful story highlighting your community's unique assets and challenges. For those that can't make it to our events or like to access this webinar after today, we post our recordings along with presentations and related resources and links on our website at www.njit.edu/tab/webinars. Today, we've highlighted 3 for you that might complement your brownfield journey. Feel free to view those recordings after today's webinar or explore the NJIT TAB site to find a vast library of resources, links, and other informative videos. We also actually just posted part 1 of this webinar series. For those that registered and attended part 1, we've already sent that information over to you. But just in case, we also have it on our website. All right. With that information out of the way, let's see what questions and comments we have. All right, it looks like we have just one question so far, and it seems that it was upvoted, so perhaps we have a few people who are interested in this topic as well. So Brian Gross says, thank you for providing the link for sub-recipients. Does a grant recipient bear any responsibility if they make sub-awards, or does this responsibility get passed solely to the sub-recipient?
That's a great question. Grantees are responsible for ensuring that subgrants or loan recipients comply with BABA as well as Davis-Bacon Act. So you will want to insert yourself into those procurement and contract administration processes of the subgrant or the loan recipient.
Great, thank you so much. If that answered your question, Brian, let us know in the chat just to make sure. If you had any additional questions on that topic, feel free to put that in the chat. But if anyone has any further questions after today, I have up here our contact information, as well as me posted in the chat, those links as well. So feel free, pick your poison. If you'd like to email, call, check out our website. We also have our LinkedIn, or if you want to just schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting, we could do that as well. Feel free to click that link and you'll see our schedule for Zoom meetings. So I think that's all of our questions for today. And with that, we thank you for spending some time with us today. Oh, I think we got another question. Never mind that. All right. Jean Carlos said, how can I find the first part of the webinar? Can I get it by email? Yes, I could go ahead and send that over to you. It's also, again, on our website at www.njit.edu/tab/webinars. But I could send that to you after the chat as well if you'd like. All right, I think that's everything. Again, I hope you all had a great day today, and we hope to see you for the final installment of What Brownfield Grantees Should Know. This part will be about grant management. Until then, we hope you take the lessons learned today to navigate your way to successful brownfield redevelopment. Again, feel free to reach out if you need anything.
Thank you.
Thank you.